Katie. We have The Message in the Hollow Oak. We are on Chapter 7, River Pirates. While Nancy and Art were running after the fleeting figure, Todd Smith came to the farmhouse to relieve Art. He looked all around for his friend, and finally decided he had better report his absence to Teresa Bancroft. As he reached the door, Julie Ann rushed out. She almost bumped into him. "Nancy's not in her bed!" she exclaimed. Todd looked puzzled.
"I was just coming to report that Art's missing. I'm sure he wouldn't have left the farmhouse unguarded. Something strange must have happened, Julie Ann."
"They're probably together," she said. "I hope they're not in danger. Let's look for them." Both Julie Ann and Todd had flashlights. They began walking around the grounds and finally came to the dig. "Look!" Julie Ann exclaimed. "Somebody put a ladder into the pit." The two flashlights did not reveal anyone in the excavation. The searchers were more puzzled than ever. "What could have happened?" Julie Ann asked.
"Listen, I hear people talking,"
Todd said. They moved toward the sound, and in a few minutes saw two flashlights bobbing. Their own lights revealed Nancy and Art.
"What's going on?"
Todd demanded.
"Did you see the ladder?"
Art queried, so he asked.
"Yes, whose is it?"
Nancy and Art related what they had seen and their chase after Tom Wilson. "We almost had caught up to him when he jumped into a car and rode off," Nancy explained. "But I thought Tom Wilson was lame," Julie Ann remarked, "so he couldn't walk properly."
So did I, Nancy replied.
"That means a fake, and I'm sure now he's Kit Cadle in disguise." Todd wondered what the intruder had planned to take out of the dig. No one could hazard a guess, since all the artifacts and fossils uncovered so far had been brought to the laboratory.
"Have you any idea, Nancy?"
Todd asked. She shook her head. By this time, Art had pulled the ladder from the excavation. It was crudely made of narrow tree branches from an oak. Nancy suggested that the whole affair should be reported to the state police in the morning and offered to do it for Teresa. She asked Art if he would take her into town directly after breakfast to phone headquarters.
"Glad to,"
he replied.
"Good night."
Nancy and Julie Ann went to bed and slept soundly until Teresa rang the rising bell. When the other diggers learned about the night's adventure, they were alarmed. Teresa tried to calm their fears, but she herself was concerned. Why was her expedition being bothered? Nancy was sure she could read the woman's thoughts. Going up to her, she said quietly, "You weren't having any trouble here until I arrived. My mystery must be the cause of it. I can't figure out how the hollow oak I'm looking for and your dig are connected, but there must be some tie-in. I'm sure Kit Cadle is trying to discourage my sleuthing. It would be better if I leave, then no one would be in danger." Teresa put an arm around Nancy's shoulders. "You're going to stay," she said firmly. "What you say may be true, but as yet we have no proof. Besides, we like having you at the dig. I won't hear of your leaving." Nancy thanked the leader and kissed her. "In any case, Art and I will report last night's episode to the state police, if you wish us to." "Yes, indeed." They rode away on the motorcycle and soon reached Walmsley. Nancy telephoned the state police, who promised to investigate at once. Next, she called her father. "Dad, I'm so glad I reached you. How's everything?"
"Just fine, but Hannah and I miss you very much. Well, what's the report on the mystery?"
Nancy brought him up to date. Then Mr. Drew told his daughter that Ned Nickerson was very eager to get in touch with her.
"I suggest you call him."
Nancy did this, trying 3 different places where she thought Ned might be, but he was not at any of them. Nancy sat in the phone booth another half a minute, thinking of the tall, good-looking young man. Right now he was working on a summer job, selling insurance. "I wonder," she thought, "if by any chance Ned is going to tell me he's coming out here." She hoped so. Art came to see if she was ready, saying he must get back to the dig. The two roared off on the motorcycle. As they approached the farmhouse, they noticed that 2 state troopers were already there. With them was an elderly Indian. Nancy dismounted and walked up to the group. She introduced herself. The troopers gave their names as Rankin and White and introduced the Indian as Robert Lightfoot.
Mr. Lightfoot is the one who built this ladder,"
Rankin said, pointing to the crude piece which lay on the ground beside them.
"I've seen others like it at his cabin. He says a man who didn't give his name came to his place and wanted to buy the ladder."
The Indian took up the story.
"He was a stranger. Told me he needed the ladder to prune his apple trees." "This time of year?" Trooper White exclaimed. "That's crazy."
Lightfoot smiled.
"I think so too."
Nancy asked for a description of the man. Upon hearing that he was lame and gray-haired, she was sure he was the same person who had brought the ladder to the excavation. The Indian was amazed to learn this, and said the buyer had not mentioned the dig. The troopers walked off a little distance for a private conversation. Nancy took the opportunity to ask Lightfoot if he had heard the legend of Pierre Francois in the Hollow Oak.
"The missionary's treasure will never be found around here," Lightfoot replied.
"Treasure?" Nancy repeated.
"Maybe you think there was only one message," the Indian went on. "The message told about the treasure. Pierre Francois was captured by the Iroquois, but he escaped. He started for the Ohio River, but never got there. River pirates stole the treasure he was carrying. I am sorry to say they killed him."
"Did the legend tell what happened to his treasure?" Nancy asked. Lightfoot nodded.
"The pirates took it to the river and hid it somewhere. I think maybe in a cave. Nature punished the pirates for their thievery. A great storm overtook them, and they all were drowned."
Nancy was intrigued by the story. Then the treasure might still be hidden in the cave?
"It could be,"
the Indian answered. The two troopers came over and said they must leave. They promised to start tracking down Tom Wilson. Lightfoot left with them. As Nancy went for her digging tools, she kept thinking about the message in the hollow oak, the legendary treasure, and its hiding place. Was it possible the pirates' loot could still be there? "I'd like to hunt for it," she said to herself. But her thoughts were interrupted when she unearthed a tiny bone. A little later, she was delighted to come upon another which matched it. Teresa was thrilled. It was not until evening that Nancy had a chance to tell Teresa about the Indian's story. The archaeologist was interested. She remarked that it was possible to go up and down the Ohio River by towboat and barge. "While you're there, perhaps you'd like to arrange for a trip," she suggested. "You'll get on at Cairo." "I'd love to," Nancy said. "Tomorrow Clem is coming to take Julie Ann and me on another search for the hollow oak with the message. If we don't find anything, perhaps it'd be worth looking in caves along the river." "The one most likely for pirates to have used would have been Cave in Rock," said Teresa. "It's on the Ohio River near Elizabethtown, Illinois. For a number of years after the Revolutionary War, outlaws and pirates used that cave as headquarters. From there, they preyed on the flatboats carrying pioneers down the river. Now it's part of a state park." "That sounds fascinating," said Nancy. The next morning, Clem's car rattled into the farmhouse yard. Nancy and Julie Ann were waiting with a box of lunch. Clem was cheerful as usual and full of exaggerated stories about the area. Right after he had related one about a pioneer who always shot with two guns crossed, Nancy asked him if he had ever heard of Pierre Francois and the pirates.
"Nope, can't say I have."
Nancy and Julie Ann grinned. It was fun to have a story to match Clem's. Nancy told him Lightfoot's version of the Hollow Oak legend.
"Well now, ain't that something?"
he said, removing his battered straw hat and scratching his head.
"Thought I knew all the stories about this neck of the woods."
By this time, they had reached the hollow oak with the arrow pointing south, and went in that direction to look for another one. After a bouncy ride, they came up to a stream of rushing water filled with rocks, many of them sharp. When Clem headed for it, Julie Ann cried out, "Oh, you're not going to try crossing this?"
"I sure am," Clem replied. "Been through here many times."
The girls held on tightly as the old, open car was driven into the water. It swung from side to side and slid off the rocks. Clem had a determined look on his face. "This is crazy," Julianne whispered. Nancy thought so too, but before she had a chance to say this out loud, the car gave a sudden jerk. The right wheels landed up on the rocks. The car tilted precariously, then went out of control. The next instant it went over on its side, throwing the occupants into the rock stream. Uh-oh. Let's see what happens to that.